G'day, Jarrad Mahon here from Investors Edge Real Estate, bringing you my final Perth Property Market update for 2019, where I'm actually going to be going deep into the sale market, the rental market, my crystal ball for what to expect moving forward with some of the suburbs to focus on and timeframes. And last market update in August, I went into some of the demand drivers. I'm going to be touching on them again and giving you some deeper insights into some areas that I haven't touched on before, which I'm really excited to share with you. So hang on and I'll launch into it. Firstly with the sale market, and you can see that the number of properties for sale was actually trending sideways to slightly down up until September last year. And then we had a number of properties coming on and building up in for sale as we went into the election. And that was very much a result of less buyers out there that caused the properties that were on the market to be sticking, and sellers weren't yet quite being realistic about the prices that were achievable. We've now got the sales data out there. There's been activity to show what prices are. So for those that can't get enough of their deposit or equity out to buy again, they're unfortunately having to stay trapped in their house and are not a buyer that would otherwise be in the market. And any investor that was hoping to regroup some money from their sale is having to stay put and keep their investment property. So they're staying off the market. So a lot more realistic on those fronts because we can see what the prices are. So it is overall good that our market's trending down and becoming tighter. And we're now at 14,000 properties for sale roughly. And that's an 11% decrease on 6 months ago and 10.8% down on the same time last year. So you can see that we're starting to now get lower, almost at the lower point than where we've been at in probably 4 years or so. And that's starting to get into the conditions where we can see the demand exceed the supply. So what's going to happen on the demand side? That's what we're really waiting for a change on. Until this kicks up, until we see the demand increase from ever increasing population, we're not going to see the prices start to increase until that happens. You can see that the trend from way back, as far as I've been measuring almost from 2013, has been downwards overall for 6 years. Now, we have had a bit of a tick up above that longer term average line in October, November and December. We're seeing our average weekly number of sales being larger for the first time in a while. Is that just a blip, or are we entering into a new trend we will need to see come January, February? The reason I'm not calling a recovery and a bounce back on our demand side yet is that we did have some pretty bad months leading up to the election and post-election, that we were at some of our lowest number of properties selling for each month. And I feel a bit of this demand we've seen wash through at the end of spring has been pent up from around that election period. So I'm not calling a recovery yet, unfortunately. When we look at the median house price, you can see that's showed up more and more drops. We're at 482,750 at the moment, and it's been a continual dropping down for the last 5 years. Had a few blips where we've thought we might have been coming back up, but it hasn't gone out of that trend line. Units is worse and is steeper. We're now at 377,500, and there's going to be a lot more pain, in my opinion, on the unit side before we get around, because the unit market typically trails the housing market by 12 to 18 months, you would have heard me say in my other updates. So the average selling time, and this tells the true picture of supply versus demand. Even though supply is tighter, with less properties to choose from, properties are still taking longer on average to sell. And we're at 84 days, which is the longest that we've had across that 4 or 5 years of measuring, and that's a pretty worrying stat that there's still really not that many buyers out there. Properties are still taking a long time to sell, and until we start seeing this come back the other way, I'm not calling it a recovery either. So this is a new stat that I thought I'd insert, and thank you to some of our viewers that give me feedback. Really appreciate getting your feedback, good, bad, or constructive. I thought I'd pop in here some stats on new dwellings under construction so that we can see what supply is coming to the market from that side of things, and it also gives us a gauge as to how the building industry is faring compared to previously, and obviously that employs a lot of people and a bit of a sign of how our economy is going. And you can see that we reached our peak of dwellings under construction approximately mid-2014. That's when we know our last peak of the market to be. And the stats run to June 19 at this point, and you can see that we're at an all-time low that we last had back in 2001 for houses, and roughly 2012 for units is when we were last at this low of dwellings under construction, and it's approximately at down here at 6,000 dwellings under construction of houses and 5,500 dwellings under construction for units. So that's certainly come a long way down when you consider we were up at 18,000 dwellings under construction in June 14 to now be at just 6,000. Ouch. That's a shrinking by a huge amount. We're about a third of what we were building previously. So again, until we start seeing that come back up, we're not going to be, in recovery, but it does go to show that not too much of supply is coming on from the new dwellings. When we look at the rental market next, so in summary, housing market that we've just touched on, we really haven't seen enough of the stats flow through to show that we're in recovery, and as far as I'm concerned, we're still finding the bottom. On the rental market side, I actually released some predictions in early January, February, expecting that the rental market would go up by 10% this year. That unfortunately hasn't happened. The rental market has tightened and we've reached a new equilibrium point, but we haven't seen the push in population continue, and we had a real hiccup, I guess, through the middle of the year going into the election, and we can only really put that down to a slowing of population growth, and we just haven't seen the rental prices increase. So we've had some increases in some areas, in the more popular family-friendly suburbs and more appealing lifestyle areas, but we've also seen some decreases in the outer areas and more oversupplied areas to offset that. So we've kind of reached more of a point of equilibrium in the majority of areas where we aren't dropping anymore. The numbers will confirm that. We've seen our number for rent, and that's actually continued to decrease marginally over the last 3 or 4 months. So it's still heading the right way for tightening up. And you can see that trend's been definitely in place since December of 2017, where our market started tightening up for rent then. We're about 30% down on the number for rent, 13% down on the number for rent on last year, and approximately 20% down on 6 months ago. The vacancy rate, you can see, had a sharp decrease from its peak at 7.6% to arrive at 2.5% in approximately January, February this year. We've then peaked back up to 2.9% where we've stayed for around the last 6 months, so not much of a change on a year ago, and we've had a slight increase from the 2.5% to 2.9% over the last 6 months. That must have been last 5 months we've been at 2.9. So at 2.9, 3% generally understood as the point where supply equals demand and prices stay the same, so that's where we're at. That's been reflected in our median rent staying at $350 per week. Now, I expect that as projects start to kick on, as population starts to kick up a bit, all the new entrants to the state, the majority of them will be renting first, and that should be where we'd see the prices increase on the rental side before we see it on the housing side. So think about it when you come to an area, you suss it out, you save your deposit, and then after you've rented for a while, you look at buying. So that's what I expect to happen. So timing the property clock and Heron Todd White confirms my thoughts with us still being seen at the bottom of market with Perth here, unchanged. We've got some changes lately for Adelaide rolling down into its bottom of the market, and our southwest moving down to approaching the bottom of the market. And we've got areas such as Brisbane and Gladstone and Gold Coast. They're all around and starting of recovery. And it'll be interesting to see where Sydney and Melbourne have been placed. I'm just trying to find them, but anecdotally I know they've had some good comeback over the last 3 to 4 months. And yep, they're listed in start of recovery. Sydney is there and Melbourne is around there. Now the main reason I put that down to is purely down to population growth and why they're coming, because of jobs. So when the jobs are there. So now the unit market, what's going on with Perth? We're still in a declining market, 12 to 18 months behind the rest of the housing market, and we've certainly got further to fall on the unit side. You never know, some of the changes that have made to the policies could see this move a bit quicker through, and I'll touch on that in a second when we get to it. Factors affecting demand. This is probably my most interesting part to cover, and I did it for the first time in August, last market update that I put together, and I've got a couple of deeper areas to go into here. So the availability of finance, the RBA has not dropped rates again since August when I last came to you, and they've been on hold since, just waiting to see the impact, I guess. And banks have relaxed their lending criteria as a result of APRA's policy changes, and my finance broker friends are telling me that it is becoming easier, or has become easier, for them to meet the serviceability requirements and get a few more loans through for people, which is great. But the biggest factor, I guess, which is affecting people's ability to borrow is that anyone that's bought in the last 5 or 6 years has had their deposit, their 10, 20% they put into the property, more or less wiped out. Because property prices have come down that 20%. Even if you can sell in this market, you now don't have your deposit to make use of to buy again, even though prices out there are really great. If you don't have a deposit to make use of, you're pretty much stuck where you are. And you also can't use that deposit or equity that you may have otherwise gained towards doing any investing. So that's the biggest factor stopping people, and all the buyers that would otherwise be changing hands for those reasons not. And they're not in the market, so it's going to take a very long time for them to save enough to get back out there. You can see from these graphs that the number of investors is 79% down on lending from its peak in 2014, and we're 21% down on a year ago for WA. First home buyers thankfully are up 12.9% in the lending to them, and 43% down on the peak, and non-first home buyers up 4.5%. So some improvement there for first home buyers and non-first home buyers, taking up more of the percentage than investors. And when we look around the states, you can see that the investor lending is the lowest in WA. So that really goes to show how much we're missing them in our market. I think there would have been more investors coming from the other states earlier if they didn't have their declines in Sydney and Melbourne, and we are starting to see some early adopters from there making good buying decisions, but they really are early adopters. We've still got a lot more to see, and we've only got 15.4% investor activity of financing being done. And when you compare that to ACT on 26%, 31% New South Wales, 26% Victoria, it's a big gap of the market that we're missing. Employment side, you can see that we've had over the last year 0.8% increase in employment, and we've levelled off with not much of an increase. We haven't got back to or over 2% we were in 2018, changing employment. So we need to see this uptick, and you can see why New South Wales and Victoria are so popular with migrants. 3% annual change increase in employment for New South Wales and 3.4% for Victoria compared to about 0.8%. So there are 3 to 4 times more new jobs available there, which is what's bringing people into there. So the population growth is what follows the employment, and you can see that we've had 1% population growth, which has been slightly trending upwards over the last 2 years, but still very slow growth. And you can see that New South Wales has had 1.4% population growth and Victoria's had 2.1%. So you can see there's actually been more jobs created in those areas than there is population growth, and that leads to wage pressure and also price increases when you've got that population growth and people having more money. So you can see our net migration is still negative with people going to other states, but trending back towards the neutral. You see that we've had an increase in overseas migration over the last couple of quarters, which is good to see that we're starting to get some of that back. We've really got to see this population growth and employment side change, otherwise we're not going to see the demand side return. Policy changes there have a big impact on the demand side of the equation, and one of them that I'm really not that in favour of is a 75% rebate on off-the-plan purchases. So that thinking around that by the state government, a number of bodies, was to stimulate the construction industry, get some jobs and other side of that back. And you can see from the new construction starts that I listed earlier, that industry is definitely hurting. But the downside of such a policy is that it affects the established market in those areas. Many people are just going to want to buy new instead of established, so that makes reselling of your established apartment even harder to do now, and that's what we've seen in the outer areas where someone would rather buy a house and land package than buy an established property there because of the $10,000 grant that applies as well. So I'm really not in favour of that as helping out the balance of buyers in our market. This next one, we've been finally reclassified as a regional city, which will have a big impact on our population growth and make us more attractive to overseas migrants, making it easier for them to get their visas and come into our state. And this is one of the changes that led to Hobart gaining so much population over the last 5 years and their economy surging. So that's a very big positive to be reclassified as that. Some of the things that RE was calling for that I'm very much in support of is a return of the $7,000 first home owners grant that we still really need to happen. That would even out and make established properties a bit more attractive to buy and lower the barrier to entry for first home buyers. And an increasing of the transfer free threshold to $550 would just open up the market a bit more for them to purchase slightly higher up price properties if they can afford it. And the final one I'm calling for along with REBA is a revoking of the foreign owner duty surcharge. Now, we need to lower the barriers for the migrants to come in, and I know population growth can be a touchy subject with not everyone being in favour of overseas migration, but I only see it as a positive. We've got an ageing population. We need skilled migrants, and it's really about who we're bringing in and looking for the right fit and the right skills to come into Perth, and we can all benefit from that if it's done right. So where to buy? In my August update, I mentioned the north coastal areas of Heathridge, Padbury, Hammersley and Craigie. They're still looking good for me over the next 12 months as the best investor spots to focus on. And when we look at my crystal ball, it's unchanged on what I said in August. I believe we've got around 6 months before we're at our bottom. I believe the north coastal will do best over this 12-month period, along with the western suburbs. And I believe the rental market will likely come back before the sale market does, because people usually rent before they buy once they're new to an area. So that brings me to the end of my market update, and I just wanted to say a very Merry Christmas to you and your family. This is us at the shopping centre the other week, trying to get a photo with our two fur baby and our 15-month-old now, and she was utterly afraid of Santa, and it was a real battle just to get her to have a shocked look on her face as opposed to bawling tears. We got her comfortable again and reversed her into the chair without seeing Santa, and then there was tears afterwards when she realised where she was. So hopefully you have a very Merry Christmas with your family, and I'm wishing you all the best. And thank you for tuning into my market updates. And for anyone that's a client of ours, I know it's been another difficult year for being a landlord, but hopefully things will gradually start to improve next year for all of us, and I wish you the very best. Thank you.